In the second week of January 1888, on a rise of open prairie in Dakota Territory north of the James River, the morning came up so warm the children walked to the sod schoolhouse with their coats unbuttoned. Snow was rotting on the south slopes. A man could work in his shirt sleeves. Out on the Nyland claim, 9 people were pulling hay off a stack the size of a barn. Ott Nyland, his brother, 2 hired Norwegian boys, a neighbor and his 3 sons, and a girl of 15 who had come along to hold the team. Sweat on their necks in January. They laughed about it. At about 3 in the afternoon, the north went the color of a gun barrel. Not a cloud coming. A wall. The wind hit that hayfield like a door slammed on a hand, and the temperature fell so fast the wet on their collars froze stiff before they reached the wagon. The snow that came with it was not the soft kind. It was old snow, ground to powder, driven flat and level so a man could not see the horses at the end of the tongue. They could not find the house. They could not find the fence. So they did what every one of them had been told to do since they were old enough to listen. They got out of the wind. They cut into the lee side of that haystack, tunneled a hollow into the hay, pulled armloads over the opening behind them, and packed themselves in, 9 bodies together, out of that killing wind. When the sky cleared Saturday morning, blue and still and 28 degrees below zero, the neighbors dug them out. 2 came out alive. 7 did not. And here is the thing that made the men digging take their hats off and stand there in the snow with nothing to say. Those 7 were dry. There was hay over them and hay around them, and hardly a flake of snow on their faces. They had not been buried. They had not been lost. They had gotten out of the wind, exactly as they were taught. The newspapers blamed the storm. They called it the Great Blizzard, the Schoolhouse Blizzard, and the Army Signal Corps counted the dead across the plains at better than 200, and everybody said the same thing at every funeral that spring, that no man could stand against a wind like that. That is not true, friend. Men stood against it that same night in worse country with less hay. The storm did not kill those 7 people. A sentence killed them. A short, comfortable, common-sense sentence that every settler on that prairie believed the way they believed in sunrise. Get out of the wind and you will live. If you are out of the wind, you are safe. That sentence is a lie. It is a lie that has been killing Americans for 200 years, and it is still in your head right now, and by the end of this, we are going to take it out of you and put something true in its place. But not yet. First, you need the whole method, because the thing that killed them is the last piece, and the last piece does not make sense until you own the first 5. The skill has a proper name, though the name has gone as quiet as the skill. The old-timers on my ridge called it making a cold camp, or throwing up a room. Manuals call it expedient shelter. It is the art of taking a body that will die in a night and putting it inside a survivable space, using nothing but your 2 hands, 40 minutes, and whatever the country happens to be made of that day. No tent, no cabin, no help coming. Your great-great-grandfather did this the way you check your mirrors. A drover caught out between towns, a trapper whose line cabin burned, a woman walking a section line when the sky turned, a boy who lost the trail hunting cows. They did not panic, because they carried the room in their heads. 25 separate tricks, small ones, most of them free, and every one of them earned in blood by somebody who did it wrong first. I am going to give you all 25. Every piece except one. That one I am holding until the end. Not to be cute, but because it is the piece that answers what happened in that haystack, and if I hand it to you now, you will nod and forget it. So stay with me by choice, friend. 20 minutes. This is worth the 20 minutes. Let me ask you something plain. If your vehicle went off the road tonight into a ditch on a county highway, in weather, 4 miles from the nearest lit window, with no signal on your phone, could you build yourself a space that would hold you until light? Not a comfortable space. A space that keeps your core above 95 degrees Fahrenheit until the plow comes. Most grown men in this country could not. They would sit in the cold car with the engine off, or they would start walking, and a certain number of them every single winter do not make it to morning. Their great-grandfathers could have done it in the dark, half drunk, with a broken arm. That is not a slight against you. That is a theft, and today we are taking it back. My name is Caleb Wren. My people have held the same ridge in Appalachia since the 1790s, and I am the 7th generation to sleep on it. My father died when I was small, and my grandfather Amos raised me, a hard, quiet, patient man who could look at a hillside and tell you where a man could pass a January night on it. Before he went, he made me sit at the plank table in his kitchen with a leather journal and a pencil, and he made me write down everything he knew while he said it out loud, and he made me promise I would not let it die in a drawer. That journal is beside me. This channel is me keeping that promise. Now understand something about how this knowledge left us. Because it did not leave because it quit working. Snow still traps air, duff still insulates. Physics did not change in 1952. What changed is that shelter turned into a product. When the war ended, the surplus depots dumped mountains of canvas and steel frame gear on the civilian market. And by the mid-1950s, the outdoor goods industry had figured out something worth more than canvas. They had figured out that a family could be sold the outdoors. Shelter stopped being something you made out of the ground under your feet and became something you bought, carried, and eventually replaced. Somebody made a fortune the day your family forgot they could throw up a room with their hands. By the end of this, you will know the whole method, and you will know the one step they worked hardest to make you forget, because that step is the only one that cannot be sold to you in a box. Before we get into the meat of it, pull the trigger on subscribe. Not for me, neighbor. Because the buried skills we drag back into daylight around here, you are going to want a next one. Here is the shape of it. 25 tricks, and they group into 6 pieces. Sight, size, skin, snow, fire, and air, and the last one. Miss any one of the first 5, and you lose sleep, you lose comfort, you lose a night. Miss the last one, and you lose the man. Most beginners do fine on the first pieces. They pick a decent spot, they pile up brush, they feel proud of the roof over their head, and they are dead right on schedule at 4 in the morning, dry as a bone, out of the wind, with a beautiful shelter around them. The last piece is the one that has been quietly stripped out of the talking for 100 years. And the real question is not what we forgot, friend. It is who cashed the check when we forgot it. Picture my grandfather on a gray November afternoon, standing dead still on a bench of hardwood above a creek, doing absolutely nothing for a full 5 minutes while the light went. I was 12 and freezing, and I wanted to start building. He said, "The man who builds first builds twice." Then he pointed with his chin, not his hand, up the slope 40 yards to a big red oak that had gone over in a windstorm and torn its root plates straight up out of the ground like a wall. That is the first piece, and it is sight, and sight is 6 tricks. Trick 1 is elevation. Cold air is heavy, and it pours downhill like water, and it pools in the bottoms, and on a clear, still night, the floor of a hollow can run 10 to 20 degrees colder than the slope above it. The National Weather Service has been documenting those cold air pools and inversions for a century. Do not sleep in the bottom. Get up on a bench or a shoulder a third of the way up the slope, out of the pool but below the ridgeline where the wind lives. Trick 2 is what is over your head. Before you commit to a spot, look up. Standing dead trees, hung up limbs, a big branch loaded with wet snow. The Forest Service calls those hazard trees, and their own crews are trained never to bunk beneath one, because they kill more people in the woods than most folks would guess. Trick 3 is water. Never lay your body in a drainage, a dry wash, a gully, or a nice flat sandy channel, no matter how comfortable it looks. Flat sand in a canyon means water has run there, and water will run there again, and it comes in the dark. Trick 4 is the back wall. You want something solid at your back that you do not have to build. That torn up root plate, a fallen log 2 feet through, a boulder, a cut bank, the downwind side of a thicket. A back wall you did not build is an hour of your life handed back to you. Trick 5 is the door. Your opening faces away from the prevailing wind, quartering off it, and if you have any choice at all, it faces east, because the sun that hits your door at 7 in the morning is free heat and free morale, and both of those matter more than you think at hour 11. And trick 6 is the one nobody teaches. Before you drive the first stick, walk a circle 30 steps out and ask 3 questions. Is there a back wall? Is there dry dead fuel? Is there bedding, dry leaves, dead grass, ferns, evergreen boughs, cattail? If the answer to any of those is no, that is not your spot, and it does not matter how pretty it is. Back wall, dry fuel, dry bedding. Off the bottom, out from under the widowmaker, up out of the wash. Look up before you lie down. Every time. That is not campfire folklore. The United States Army has taught essentially that sequence in its cold weather and survival instruction since the Second World War, when the Army learned in Alaska and in the Ardennes what it costs to bed troops in a cold sink. That is the federal government confirming what your great-grandfather did by squinting at a hillside. The number one botch on this step is falling in love with a view or a flat spot. Beginners pick a beautiful open meadow with a nice level floor. That meadow is a frost hollow, that flat floor is a drainage, and at 3 in the morning, the temperature on that ground is 15 degrees colder than the brushy little bench they walked past. They wake up with their feet numb and no idea why, because everything looks perfect. Here is your homework this week, and it costs nothing. On your next walk, in a park, a woodlot, your own back fence line, stop and pick a shelter site. Out loud. Say the 3 questions. Back wall, fuel, bedding. Do it once and it starts becoming a reflex. And reflexes are what you actually have in an emergency, not intentions. Because next comes the piece that feels wrong to every modern person alive. You are going to want to build big. Big feels safe. Big is what will kill you, and the size rule your great-grandfather used has a number attached to it that will surprise you. That is next. 1929, high country in Wyoming, a sheep camp. An old Basque herder named Echart shows a young hand how to make a night camp with no wagon. The boy scrapes out a lean-to he can sit up in and stretch his arms, proud of it. The old man looks at it and laughs and says something the boy does not forget, that the boy has built a barn and he is not a horse. Piece 2 is size, and size is 4 tricks. The whole principle is this. You have one furnace and it is your body, and a resting adult puts out somewhere around 100 watts of heat, which is about the same as a bright old incandescent bulb. That is your entire heating budget. Every cubic foot of air you enclose is air you must heat with a bulb. So trick 7 is the body plus a hand rule. Your shelter is as long as you are with your boots on, and as wide as your shoulders plus a hand's width on each side. That is all. It should feel like a coffin and you should hate it, and at 2 in the morning you will love it. Trick 8 is ceiling height. Lying flat, you want to be able to touch the roof with your knuckles without straightening your arm. Every extra foot of headroom is a chimney for the heat you are making. Trick 9 is the door plug. A shelter with an open mouth is a bellows. Wind gets in and rolls right through and strips the warm air off you all night. You build a plug. A bundle of debris the shape of the opening. A pack, a block of snow, a wad of boughs lashed with a shoestring. And trick 10 is the buddy multiplier. If there are 2 of you, build 1 shelter, not 2. 2 bodies in a body-sized room is double the furnace and half the labor. And labor is calories, and calories are heat. Small room, low roof, tight door. 2 bodies beat 1. Build a coffin, not a cabin, every time. Military cold weather doctrine says the same thing in flatter language, that shelter volume must be minimized to the space required by the occupants, because the occupants are the heat source. That is not folklore. That is the Army writing down in the 1940s what a Basque sheep herder knew in his hands. Now here is where the money comes in. Circle the 1950s. That decade is when American shelter changed hands. Wartime research had given industry aluminum tubing, coated nylon, and a national appetite for the outdoors. And the sporting goods houses and the big mail-order catalogs went to work on the American family with a new idea, that going outside required equipment, and the more room in your equipment, the better a provider you were. Wall tents, cabin tents, umbrella tents with a center pole you could stand under. And by the 1970s, when lightweight backpacking hit, the message had completed its turn. Shelter is a thing you carry, and if you are not carrying it, you do not have it. 2 generations later, a grown man standing in a woodlot with 100 acres of dry oak leaves around him honestly believes he has no shelter because his shelter is in the garage. Not a conspiracy, neighbor, just how markets work. Nobody outlawed the debris hut. They just made sure there was no dollar in you knowing how to make one, and considerable dollars in you buying one every 6 years. And let me say the quiet part on gear. A four-season mountaineering tent will run you $800 to $1,200 today, and it is a marvel, genuinely, and I own gear myself, and I am glad to have it. But the room your great-grandfather built cost him nothing but sweat, and worked for 200 years, and never once had a broken pole or a busted zipper at the exact wrong moment. And if that $800 tent is already in your garage, friend, that is not on you. They are very good at selling. Most people are. The number one botch on this step is the beginner's palace. Folks build a lean-to 8 feet wide with a roof they can sit under and a nice open front facing a fire, and they think they have built shelter. What they have built is a wind scoop with a view. At 2 in the morning, the fire is coals, and there are 20 times more cubic feet of cold air in there than their body can heat, and they lie there shivering, absolutely baffled, in a structure that took them 4 hours. Homework this week. Take a tape measure and find out how much space you actually need. Lie down on your living room floor with a jacket on and have somebody mark your length and your shoulder width. Memorize those 2 numbers. That is the size of the room that will save your life. Because next we cover the skin, the roof, and walls, and there is a depth of leaf litter that separates a man who sleeps from a man who shakes until dawn, and it is far, far thicker than you would ever guess. That is next. 1894, Southern Missouri, a wet November. A woman named Cordelia Tapp, walking home from her sister's with a baby in a shawl, misses the ford and loses the light. She lays a pole from a stump to a fallen sycamore, ribs it out with limbs, and then does one thing for the next hour and a half. She rakes leaves with her bare hands, again and again, until the pile over her poles is deeper than her arm is long. They found her the next day, both of them fine, black leaf mold in her hair for a week. Piece 3 is the skin, and it is 5 tricks. Trick 11 is the ridge and the ribs. 1 strong pole for a spine, propped from a stump, a rock, or a forked stick at the head end and running to the ground at the foot end. That is your ridge. Then lay ribs along both sides, close together, a hand's width apart, angled like the bones of a fish. Trick 12 is shingling. Everything you put on that frame, bark slabs, evergreen boughs, sod chunks, big leaves, slabs of dead grass, goes on starting at the bottom and working up, each layer overlapping the one below it, exactly the way a roof shingle works, so water runs from one piece to the next instead of into the seam. Bottom up, every single time. Trick 13 is depth, and here is the number people do not believe. 2 to 3 feet of dry debris over the ribs. Not 2 inches. Not a nice, tidy layer. As deep as your arm from fingertips to elbow, and deeper if it is loose. Dead leaves work because they hold still air in the millions of little spaces between them, and still air is the actual insulator. The leaves are just the thing holding it in place. Trick 14 is the hold-down lattice. Once you have that mound, lay light sticks and brush loosely over the whole thing so the wind cannot peel it off you at midnight. And trick 15 is the test, and it is free. Crawl inside, lie down, and look up. If you can see daylight through the roof, wind and water are coming through the roof. Pile on more. Then have somebody scatter a hatful of water over it, or wait for rain, and find out where it drips while you still have the strength to fix it. Ridge and ribs. Shingle from the bottom, arm-deep debris, lattice it down. No daylight through the roof. Every time. The Department of Agriculture's Forest Service and the Civilian Conservation Corps crews it trained through the 1930s taught brush and bark shelter construction in exactly this order to boys who had never spent a night out, because those crews had to put thousands of young men into remote country and bring them back whole. I will tell you about the first roof I ever built. I was 13. I laid my boughs top down, the way you would tile a floor, working from the ridge toward the ground, because that is the way it seemed to make sense, and when the rain came at midnight, every seam on that shelter funneled water directly onto my chest. I crawled out and stood there soaked in the dark, and my grandfather was sitting under a tarp 40 feet away with his pipe, dry as a hymn book, and he had watched me build it wrong and said nothing. He did not yell. He handed me his coffee and said, "Now you know." I have shingled bottom up for 30 years. The number one botch on this step is calling it done at 6 inches of debris. The shelter looks like a shelter. It has a shape It photographs well, and it insulates about as well as a bedsheet, and the man inside it spends the whole night wondering why he is cold in a shelter he is proud of. Homework this week. Go out and time yourself. Rake up a pile of leaves with your hands only, no rake, and see how long it takes to make a mound the size of a small car. That is what an actual shelter's worth of debris looks like, and knowing that number now means you will not run out of daylight later. Pattern break, friend. Everything up to here is the easy part. Sticks and leaves in country that has sticks and leaves, but most Americans who die of cold do not die in the leaf woods. They die in the open, in white country, where there is nothing to build with but the thing that is trying to kill them. And that is where the survival myth was born, and where men have died for lack of knowing one simple property of snow. 1913. The Bitterroot country of Montana. A mail carrier goes down with his horse in a whiteout. No timber in reach, nothing but drift and wind. He does not fight it. He gets out his shovel and he digs into the snow, and he lives, and the man who freezes to death that same week is the man who stayed above it. Piece 4 is snow, and it is 6 tricks, and the first thing you must understand is that snow is not the enemy. Fresh snow is somewhere around 90% trapped air. It is one of the finest insulators available to a person outdoors, free, everywhere, and self-repairing. Trick 16 is the snow trench, and it is the fastest lifesaver in this entire story. Dig or stomp a slot in a firm drift, just longer and wider than you, 2 to 3 feet deep. Roof it with boughs, skis, brush, or blocks of firm snow leaned together like an A over the top, and seal the ends. 30 minutes, and you have gone from open prairie to a room. Trick 17 is the tree well. In deep snow country, a big spruce or fir has a hollow around its trunk under the skirt of its lowest branches where the snow never landed. Dig it out, floor it with boughs, weave the branches down for a door, a ready-made room the tree built for you. Trick 18 is the quinsy, and it has a step in it that people skip and pay for. You pile loose snow into a mound 6 to 8 feet across and about as tall as your chest, and then you stop and you wait. 1 to 2 hours minimum. 2 is better. During that wait, the disturbed snow crystals bond to one another. The word is sintering, and the pile turns from powder into a self-supporting shell. Hollow it before it sets, and it comes down on you. Trick 19 is the depth stick, which is the trick that keeps a quinsy from collapsing. Before you hollow it, cut a dozen sticks all exactly 12 inches long and push them into the mound from the outside all over, pointed at the center. When you are digging from inside and you meet the end of a stick, you stop digging there. Every wall on that dome is a foot thick, guaranteed, without guessing. Trick 20 is the cold sink. Dig your entrance low and your sleeping shelf high. Warm air rises and cold air sinks, so you make a pit by the door for the cold to fall into and you sleep on a platform above it. That one trick can be worth 10 or 15 degrees where your body actually lies. And trick 21 is the smooth ceiling. Run your mitten over the inside of the dome until every ridge and lump is gone, because meltwater follows a smooth curve down the wall and drips off a lump straight onto your face. Then mark the outside of your shelter with sticks or gear so nobody walks over the top of your roof in the dark. Pile it. Let it set. Stick it. Hollow it. Sink the cold. Smooth the dome. Every time. The Army's Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory up in Hanover, New Hampshire, has spent decades measuring exactly this: snow's insulating value, sintering time, wall strength, and cold weather units still teach the depth stick method to soldiers today. That is the federal government confirming what a Montana mail carrier worked out with a grain shovel in 1913. And here is where the money came again, in a second wave. Circle the years around 1968 through 1975. That is when lightweight synthetic gear went from expert equipment to mass market, when nylon and aluminum and down got cheap enough for everybody, and the whole culture of going outside reorganized itself around what was in your pack. Magazines that had run articles on building brush and snow shelters in the 1930s were running gear reviews by the 1970s. The instruction did not get disproven. It got crowded out by the advertising that paid for the page. Not a conspiracy, neighbor, just how markets work. Nobody banned the snow trench. There simply was no revenue in a hole in the ground. The number one botch on this step is impatience with the sintering. Somebody piles the snow and starts hollowing after 20 minutes because they are cold and it is getting dark, and the roof comes down on them while they are inside it, wet, alone, and in the dark. That is a fatal mistake, and it is entirely preventable by sitting on your hands for 2 hours, which, by the way, is a fine time to gather bedding and firewood. Homework this week. If there is snow where you live, go out and dig a trench long enough for your body and lie down in it for 10 minutes, roofed with nothing at all. Notice how the wind vanishes. 10 minutes and you will never be afraid of snow the same way again. Because next comes fire and air, and the honest truth that the two things that keep you alive out there are also the two things that quietly kill people inside their own shelters every winter, in a way you cannot smell and will not wake up from. That is next. 1871, Adirondack country. A guide named Pardon Rice builds what the old woodsman called a night fire, a long fire, laid the full length of the man, with a wall of green logs stacked behind it to throw the heat back into the open front of a bark lean-to. 2 men sleep in shirt sleeves at 10 degrees above zero, and one of them wakes at intervals all night to feed it, because that is the price. Piece 5 is heat and air, and it is 5 tricks. Trick 22 is the reflector and the long fire. A fire in the open sends about half its heat to the sky and to the woods behind it. Stack a wall of green logs or stones or packed snow blocks on the far side, 3 to 4 feet high, and lay the fire long and narrow rather than in a cone, parallel to your body, at about arm's length from the open face of a lean-to. You are not warming yourself at a fire. You are building a heat machine with a wall on one side and a reflecting roof on the other, and you are the middle of it. Trick 23 is stones, and here is a hard safety line. Heat dry stones at the fire's edge, roll them out with a stick, let them cool until you can hold your palm near them, wrap them in cloth, and put them at your feet or against your belly. They will hold warmth for hours. But never, never use rocks pulled out of a precinct bed or from wet, porous ground. Water trapped inside a stone turns to steam in a fire, and the stone can burst like a shell and throw pieces of itself into your face. Dry stone from high ground only, and keep your body out of the line of it while it heats. Trick 24 is fire discipline in a closed shelter, and this is the one that kills quietly. A candle for light in a snow shelter is generally acceptable practice with adequate ventilation. A stove, a charcoal fire, a grill, a generator, or an engine anywhere near an enclosed space is not. Carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and it binds to your blood roughly 200 times more readily than oxygen does, which means you do not gasp, and you do not cough, and you do not wake up. You get a headache, you get sleepy, and you die comfortable. So you keep 2 vents, one low at the door, one punched through the roof at an angle, and you keep a stick inside the shelter to reopen the roof vent when snow closes it, and you check it before you sleep. And trick 25 is the one nobody puts on a list because it is not a structure at all. Get dry before you get still. Wet clothing loses the large majority of its insulating value because water pushes the still air out of the fibers, and water carries heat away from you many times faster than air does. So you work slow when you build. You strip a layer before you start digging, even though it feels crazy. You open your collar and your cuffs and let the steam out, because the sweat you make building the shelter is the frost that kills you inside it. Wall behind, fire long, stone dry, vent open, body dry, every time. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention publishes the carbon monoxide warnings every winter, and the pattern in the fatality data is always the same. People bringing a heat source into an enclosed space during a storm or an outage, meaning, well, dying quietly. That is the federal government confirming, with a morgue's worth of evidence, what the old trappers said plain. Fire wants sky. Now, they sell a heated sleeping bag with a rechargeable battery and a phone application for around $600, and there is a heated bivy sack that will run you closer to $1,000. It will keep you toasty until the battery dies, which in real cold is faster than the label says. A wall of green logs, a long fire, and 2 dry stones cost nothing, and they have worked every night for 200 years and never once needed a charge. And if the battery bag is already on your shelf, friend, that is not on you. That is good marketing meeting an honest fear. The number one botch on this step is the man who builds a beautiful, tight shelter and then brings his little stove inside and seals the door against the wind because he is doing everything right. He is doing everything right except one thing, and it is the thing you cannot smell. Homework this week. Put a battery-powered carbon monoxide alarm in your house if you do not have one, and put a second one in your vehicle kit. $20 to $30. That is the cheapest life insurance in this entire story. Pattern break, friend. Everything I have given you so far, all 25 minus the last handful, is what people already half know. Sight, size, skin, snow, fire. Those 5 pieces are what any decent book will tell you, and a man can do all 5 of them perfectly. Build a shelter that would make a guide nod, crawl in dry with a full belly and a warm stone at his feet, and be dead before the sun comes up. That is where the survival myth was born. That is where those 7 people in the haystack died. Here it is. Go back with me to that stack on the Dakota prairie. Slow it down. It is full dark by 4:30. The wind on the outside of that hay is going by at 40 miles an hour, and the noise of it is like a train that never finishes passing. Inside the hollow, it is quiet. It is so quiet, the girl of 15 can hear the neighbor's youngest boy crying and then stop crying. They are packed in tight, 9 bodies, shoulder against shoulder, and there is hay pulled over the entrance and hay all around and above them. There is no wind on them at all. They are, every one of them, thinking the same thankful thought, that they made it, that they got out of the wind. And underneath them, under their hips and their shoulders and their heels, is bare, frozen sod. They scraped the hay off the ground to make room. They cleared their floor the way you would sweep a room to be tidy. 9 people lay their bodies down flat on a sheet of Dakota prairie that was going to 28 below zero, with 2 inches of chaff between their skin and the earth. The ground killed them. Not the storm, the ground. Here is the mechanism, and it is not mystical, it is plumbing. Your body loses heat 5 ways, and the fast one, the one that outruns all the others, is conduction. Direct contact with something colder than you. Cold, wet ground and packed snow behave nothing like still air. Water conducts heat away from a body roughly 25 times faster than air does, and frozen wet earth is far closer to water than it is to air. Air can be still. The ground can never be still. It is an infinite sink with no bottom, and it will pull the heat out of your back all night without ever warming up an inch, because behind that cold ground is more cold ground all the way down. A man loses core temperature lying on frozen earth faster than the same man loses it standing up in the wind with his coat open. Once his core drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, that is hypothermia. Below about 82, most people are unconscious. And it happens without drama. Shivering, then no shivering, then confusion, then sleep. So the last piece, the piece that has been stripped out of the talk for 100 years, is the bed. Not the roof, the bed. And it is 4 tricks, and they are the most important 4 in this entire story. First, the order of work. The bed comes before the roof, before the ridgepole, before the shingling, before the fire. You build the thing you are going to lie on. Because if you run out of daylight, you would rather have a thick bed and no roof than a fine roof and bare ground. Second, the depth. 4 to 6 inches of compressed insulation under you, minimum, and more in snow. That is compressed. That means you piled it up to your knee and then lie on it and watch it flatten to the thickness of a couch cushion. And if it flattens thinner than 4 inches, you get up and pile on more. Third, the material and the method. Evergreen boughs are the king of it, laid down in overlapping rows with the cut butts down into the ground and the springy tips arching up, shingled row on row from the foot to the head so the whole thing acts like a mattress of 1,000 little springs. No boughs? Dry leaves, dead grass, ferns, cattail, shredded cedar bark, pine straw, hay, corn stalks, cardboard, crumpled newspaper, the floor mats out of your car, your emptied backpack under your hips and shoulders, anything that holds still air and is dry. Fourth, the width. Build the bed wider than you think, because a man rolls in his sleep, and the shoulder or hip that rolls off the edge onto bare ground at 3 in the morning is the shoulder that wakes him up cold and confused and stealing heat from the rest of him. Bed before roof. 4 to 6 inches, compressed, butts down, tips up, wider than you sleep. The ground takes what the wind cannot. And here is the master litany, the whole thing in one breath, the sentence I want in your head instead of the one that killed those settlers. Small room, dry body, thick bed, cracked vent, wind at your back. Get out of the wind and then get off the ground. Every time. The Army has taught insulation from the ground as a first principle of cold weather bivouac since it started keeping cold injury statistics in the 1940s. Every mountain rescue outfit in this country teaches it. Every hypothermia protocol in emergency medicine includes getting the patient off the cold surface before anything else, because they know exactly where the heat is going. Now do the arithmetic on that haystack. There was hay above them and hay around them, and thousands of pounds of it within reach of their hands in the dark. 6 inches of that hay pulled underneath them, an armload each, 2 minutes of work, and 7 people go home to their families. 6 inches, 7 lives. That is the whole distance between the story we tell about that blizzard and the story that could have been. And if you grew up sleeping on the ground on hunting trips, on bare tent floors, on a thin pad on frozen gravel, and you came through it fine, I understand, friend. My granddad slept on bare pine needles more nights than I have slept in a bed, and he lived to 89 and outlived 3 of his brothers. But dumb luck is not a preservation method. Knowing is. And nobody hid this from you on purpose. There is no villain in a room somewhere laughing about bough beds. What happened is smaller and sadder than that. In the 1970s and 1980s, as our public lands filled up, the agencies rightly stopped people from cutting boughs and digging pits at every campsite, and low-impact camping became the standard. And it needed to. But when the practice went, the knowledge went with it, and the gear catalog was standing right there with a foam pad and a price tag. Not a conspiracy, neighbor. There just was not any money in reminding you that the ground is what kills, and the cure is free and lying all around you. So here is the whole method, top to bottom, and I want you to say it with me. Off the bottom, out from under the widowmaker, out of the wash, back wall you did not build, door quartered away from the wind and facing the morning sun, fuel and bedding within 30 steps, or it is not your spot. Body long, shoulders plus a hand, knuckles to the ceiling. Plug the door, 2 bodies, 1 room. Ridge and ribs a hand apart, shingle from the bottom up. Debris arm deep, then deeper. Lattice it down. No daylight through the roof. In snow, trench it in 30 minutes, or take the tree while the tree already dug, or pile the mound and wait 2 hours for it to set. Depth sticks at 12 inches. Cold sink low, sleeping shelf high. Smooth the dome so the drip runs down the wall. Wall behind the fire, fire long beside you. Dry stone only, never wet rock. 2 vents, always open, and no stove or coals in a sealed room. Work slow. Vent your collar, do not sweat. And before any of it, before the first pole, before the first branch, build the bed. 4 to 6 inches compressed, butts down, tips up, wider than you sleep. Get out of the wind, then get off the ground. That is the whole method. That is the skill your great-great-grandparents lived by, and those 7 people in the haystack died without. And now it is yours. This was never really about sticks and snow, neighbor. It was about being a person who cannot be shut off. If the truck goes in the ditch, you sleep. If the power goes out for 9 days in an ice storm, you know how to make one room in your house small and warm and vented instead of freezing in a big cold house. If the trail goes wrong, you do not have to be rescued before dark, because dark is not your deadline anymore. That is not survivalism. That is not doom talk. That is ordinary competence that was quietly taken off you and that you just took back in 20 minutes. Here is your one small Saturday. Go out back with nothing but your hands. Rake up a pile of dry leaves or dead grass as long as your body and as high as your knee. Lie down on it. Feel it compress under your hip and understand in your bones how much material 4 inches of compressed bedding actually takes. Then, if you want the full version, lean a pole from a stump, rib it, shingle it bottom up, and pile it arm deep. 2 hours, no money, no gear, no permission. You will sleep on that bed sometime, and you will remember this. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments how your grandparents did it, whether your people used spruce boughs or cedar bark or corn shucks or straw ticks, whether they slept in snow trenches in the Dakotas or under bark lean-tos in the Smokies, and what they called it. Different regions did this different ways, and half of what I know came from somebody's grandmother by way of a comment section. The story that gets the most comments is the story I go deep on next. Next time, the 2-cent tallow and cattail lamp that lit a homestead through a whole winter for the cost of a candle stub. And the decade the oil trade made sure your grandmother forgot she could make her own light out of a bowl of grease and a rush. Keep the old ways, they kept.